Okay, so before we dive into today's video, I just wanted to take a moment and thank all of you for your continued support with this channel. At the time of taping this video on December 28th of 2021, there have been over 200,000 views. There has also been over 20,000 watch hours, and additionally, there have been over 860 new subscribers to the channel. Now, to some YouTubers, that's going to be considered chump change, but I do not take these numbers for granted, and am truly appreciative of all of this continued support. Now, as crazy as 2021 has been, I am excited for 2022 and coming up with additional content for all of you. So just make sure you leave a comment in the comment section below, letting me know what type of content you like the most, so I can cater this channel to your enjoyment. Once again, thank you so much. I hope you had an enjoyable 2021, and let's dive into the final video of the year. What's going on, everybody? Nick Costa here, and welcome to this video on how to tune and muffle your bass drum. This is part one of a two-part series where I'm going to be going over replacing the batter head of the bass drum. Now, the reason why it's going to have that ported front head is because part two of this series, I'm going to go over my procedure on replacing that reso head, but I'm going to do it with a non-ported head. This way, you're going to be able to hear the difference the kick drum has with a front head that's ported and non-ported. Throughout the video, I'm going to be going over a few different muffling techniques so you can hear how that can change the sound of the bass drum. I'm excited to get into this with all of you, so let's get started. The bass drum. Most of the time, it is the largest part of the drum set and is one of the most important components, along with the snare drum. Now, some of you might be saying, you're out of your mind, the ride cymbal's more important, your hi-hats are more important. But if you don't have one of those two things, you can still get by with playing your drum set. If you don't have a bass drum, however, yeah, you could still get by with playing your drum set, but it's going to be a lot more awkward. So with that being said, a lot of folks have different ways of tuning a bass drum, just like how there are a bunch of different ways of setting up your drum set. Sometimes you will see some people and it looks like their entire laundry basket is inside of their bass drum. Sometimes you're going to see bass drums with no front head, or if they do have a front head, sometimes you're going to see them with or without a mic port. Now, if you're new to drumming or unfamiliar with how all of this works, this video is going to be perfect for you because I am going to just kind of go over what all of those things do, and hopefully this video helps you find a solution that best fits the sound that you're looking for. So let's dive into the bass drum that I'm going to be using for this video. It is a 18 deep by 22 diameter Ludwig Classic Maple. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Classic Maple series, they are 7 ply maple shells, and the bearing edge consists of a 45 interior cut as well as a slight round over for the exterior cut. Now, I'll admit, 18 inches deep is pretty big. And because of that, since it is 22 inches in diameter, you do have to hit this drum pretty hard in order to get both heads to resonate. Now, as far as depth is concerned, back in the day, 14 inches was a pretty standard size. Over time, eventually 16 became standard, and then in the early 2000s with the pop punk era, 20 inches was a standard, and some companies were just taking full Keller tubes, which are 24 inches in length, and not cutting them at all. The one thing that you have to keep in mind though, the deeper that the drum is, the harder you have to hit it to get both heads to resonate. The shallower the drum is, the more attack and punch you're going to get out of it. Now, with that being said, although my drum is 18 inches deep, as far as approaching how to tune the drum, it's the same way as any other bass drum that I've approached. So let's go ahead and dive into putting new heads on the drum. Okay, so now that the drum is on its side, you can actually see how deep it really is. But besides the point, the configuration that I like to use with this drum is the standard Ludwig front head. This is a Remo PS3 smooth white. I actually put a 4-inch mic port because of the fact that since I am using this here in the studio and the majority of the time when I am playing out live, they close mic all of the drums. Just makes it a little bit easier to mic it and get a microphone inside of the bass drum rather than on the outside. That is something we'll go over a little bit later on in this video. Now, on the batter side, I am a big fan of the Remo PowerStroke P3 Clear. This is the head that actually does come standard with Ludwig Classic Maple. I myself have replaced that stock head, and put the Remo P3 clear on it. You're also going to notice that there is an impact patch on it as well. That actually does come with every Remo bass drum head, or at least every P3 clear head. So you do have that, and you can add that on. We'll go over that a little bit later as well. So for the sake of this video, let's get started with replacing the batter head first, because of the fact that we are going to be experimenting with the resonance side, both with a mic port like it currently is and without. If you've watched any of my other tuning videos, then you are well aware of my favorite key is that Remo Quick Key. It is magnetic, so it holds on to the tension rod, and it also has the threading here, so you can attach it to a drill, making it a whole lot faster to remove any tension rods. Do not recommend using a drill for tightening tension rods, because you can over tighten one and then all of a sudden you overstretch your head and it becomes a big issue.
If it's weightless and it's white like a ghost, step right now I can see, so let's go.
Alright, so now that all of those tension rods are loose, I myself like to go kind of in a cross star-esque pattern. I am not a big fan of going around in a circle, because if that head is super tight and there's a lot of tension on it, if you're going in a circle, you are loosening it unevenly. And if your drum is a little weathered, or if it's in a school setting and it has seen better days, there's a possibility just having that tension on one side over the other side could actually affect not only the bearing edges themselves, but it also can affect the hoops. Drum head, it totally affects, but since you're removing the heads, it really doesn't matter at that point. So now that all of them are loose, the one thing to keep in mind, especially with bass drums, is that the claws that you have actually do come off with the tension rod. And you'll also notice that there have been some marks that do get made, even though the inside of the Ludwig Classic Maple claws actually has felt. Doesn't matter. You're still going to get some of those markings on there. So if you don't want to have an entire hoop with a bunch of marks all throughout it, one rule of thumb is once they are all loose, you can actually pick up both the old head and the hoop at the same time. And I totally missed this lug over here, which is why it wouldn't come up. So let's go ahead and loosen that one. And once they are all loose, once again, you can pick up both the hoop with tension rods and claws and the head. And by resting the bass drum head on a drum stool like I just did out of shot, that makes sure that the claws all stay in place with the tension rods and everything else. So now that that is off, again, like any other drum that you go and tune, general rule of thumb is to just check your bearing edges. It's a perfect time to inspect them. Make sure that they are smooth, even. Make sure there's no major craters or shell separation, ply separation, anything like that. You can also get a clean microfiber towel or any type of cloth that is soft, and you can wipe down any dirt, dust, and debris that does accumulate around the bearing edge. You want to make sure it is as smooth and as clean as possible. That way when you go to put the new head on, the head actually seats to the bearing edge and there isn't, dust particles, dirt particles, anything like that getting between the bearing edge and the collar of the drum head. All right, while you have that head off, it's also a perfect time, if you need to, you can wipe down the interior of the shell. Since I have that mic port on the front, there is a little bit of that is kind of caking up on the inside. Not sure if it's, looks like dirt to me. So, not that this drum has been like outside or anything, but things accumulate. Okay, so now let's talk about that batter head. I myself, like I said, am a big fan of the Remo Power Stroke P3 Clear, also known as the PS3, not the actual gaming console, but the drum head. Now the Remo P3 Clear is a 1-ply head, but it has this ring on the inside, which actually helps with some muffling of the overtones. And I like the way that it sounds. You can have this drum be wide open, and the drum will sound great. You can also have it super fat and thuddy. It's a well-rounded workhorse of a drum head in my opinion. Now regardless of the drum, say like those 68 downbeats that I restored here on the channel, I used a P3 clear on that as well. It's just that bass drum was wide open. Now we're gonna take it one step further with installing this head, and I am actually going to install the Remo sub muffle system, and this is supposed to be an alternative to some other brands where you have these foam inserts that rest on the outside of the drum head. This actually could be something that could be useful for you because of the fact that if you feel that a P3 clear with a wide open bass drum just sounds a little too harsh, meaning that there are too many overtones, this is a great alternative because it comes with 4 separate pieces. So you can have all 4 pieces around the exterior of the bass drum, or depending on the situation, you can add and remove as you are moving along with those different styles of music or different playing situations. So we are actually going to install that with this batter head so we have that flexibility and we can actually hear the difference between when there isn't anything attached and when there is something attached. So first thing, I'm going to actually take that off because I want to make sure that the crown logo on the Remo head is actually in line with the Classic Maple badge on the bass drum, and it looks like it is. And then you're going to notice with this sub muffle system that there's a crown at the top and it actually has the diameter on the bottom, and you see it just kind of rests over top of the collar of the actual bass drum head itself. I'm going to grab the hoop and place it back on the drum, and you can see now it just kind of holds everything in place. Now, one thing to keep in mind, bass drum hoops, where your kick pedal attaches, you always get this road rash. It's what we basically call it, or pedal rash or whatever. You can see a little bit of it here. There's a lot more of it on the top portion. So once again, if you want to make sure that if you are replacing your bass drum heads, just make sure that that is on the bottom where your bass drum pedal is going to attach, because of the fact that if it's moving around, you then are going to get those marks as well. And that's probably the last thing that anybody wants to deal with. So once you do that, you then can start to get your tension rods in line and thread it just a little bit, just so they stay in. Now, since there's no tension on any of them, you don't have to worry about going in a cross star pattern because there's, once again, no tension on the drum head or the hoops or anything whatsoever. All right, so now that that is in place, just like every other drum, you want to actually finger tighten your tension rods. I myself like to go in a cross star pattern, and with this particular kick drum, I have 10 lugs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So I go 1 and 2 across from one another, finger tighten until I can't tighten them anymore, and then once again, you know, go across to another set, finger tighten once again, trying to get equal tension across that head as we go forth with it. All right, so now with bass drums, just like everything else, you take your key, and I myself just do a half a turn on each lug, just because I don't want to make it too tight. Now, as you do this, you may actually start to hear some crackling and popping. That is okay. It's just the collar of the head starting to seat to the bearing edge, which is totally fine. You're also going to notice I'm keeping my hand here so I know where we started. Now, once you do that, what you can do is you can actually press down on the middle of the head, and you'll start to see any of the areas that are looser than the others. You'll start to see some of these wrinkles. So we have a good amount there, and looks like just this section a little bit. So we're gonna have to tighten these just a hair. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. Cool. Now that we have this in place, you know what? Why don't we just do another half a turn? So maybe a full turn wouldn't be such a bad idea. Hearing a little bit of crackling there, which is a good thing. There we go. Okay, so now that that is in place, we have to help get this head to seat a little bit more to the bearing edge. So if you've watched some of those other videos that I have uploaded either for toms or the snare drum, then you know about pressing on that center head and giving it CPR. Obviously this drum is a whole lot bigger and you can do CPR with your hands, but actually my favorite or most useful way of doing this is actually to sit on the head itself. So before you do this, you just want to make sure that the pants that you are wearing don't have ridiculous studs or zippers or designs on the back. Don't really think any of you would be wearing them, but if you are, it's a fair warning because you don't want any of that to puncture the head itself. So just a normal pair of jeans or anything, and you just sit on the drum head and give just a little bit of pressure, and you'll hear that it kind of crackles, as ridiculous as that sounds. But help seat the head, and now we can get into tuning it. So, just like everything else, tap around, listen to the different sounds, and then you just want to make sure that you get all of them to sound the same. So you can hear some of them are a little bit higher than others. For example, if we use this as our reference pitch, compared to the one next to it, a lot higher, even the two down here. So these two are higher, so we're gonna start out by just lowering them first. Now here's another tip that can help you out a little bit. If you're tapping around with your finger and it's all starting to kind of sound the same, you can also take your bass drum beater. So in this case, here's a Vic Firth VKB1 beater, and you can just tap around with the actual beater that you're going to be using on the drum. That sounds a little lower. Cool, and then rinse and repeat, try and get them to all sound the same. Now this is something, once again, it's all taste and preference. So I myself with this bass drum like it to be lower in pitch, and because of the fact that I'm not really doing anything like big band jazz or small group jazz or anything like that where I need drums wide open, I like to have it a little bit lower. You can see there's a good amount of give to that. And then a good rule of thumb to test it out is just to lean the drum up so both heads are open and free, and then just do a tap test. Now that might be a little too dead, so we're gonna tighten it up a little bit. So we're gonna just do a quick little turn on each one of these. And check. All right, that seems pretty close. So once again, you can do a test. Now I feel like that might be a hair too high, so I'm just going to take like little to no tension off of each one. Once again, this is a 10 lug drum, so a little bit goes a long way when it comes to that. It's got a good punch to it, so let's go around and check. All right, so now that I think that's the proper tuning for this particular bass drum, let's talk about muffling a bass drum. There's always that joke of some drummers like to throw their laundry into their bass drum, meaning they like to stuff it with pillows and blankets and all this other stuff, so when you look inside it, it literally looks like a dryer. With that being said, it's because they are looking for that dead thud. They want that instant punch and attack. Now, although that might sound good when you are sitting behind the drum kit, keep in mind that you are dissipating and shortening the sustain of the drum itself. So if you're in a situation like, let's say, an educational environment where you don't have a bass drum mic, your sound is going to dissipate before it even reaches the audience. They probably aren't going to hear much of it, especially when you are playing with a band. Or let's say you're in a gymnasium for a basketball game and you're a pep band. As soon as you do that, it's going to just die instantly. So I am a huge fan of keeping the bass drums as wide open as possible, even with an 18x22, and then doing minimal amounts of muffling just to kind of help tame it a little bit. So you're going to see later on in this video, we're going to go back and forth between a bunch of different configurations so you can hear what it sounds like. But you're going to have a wide open setting, and then we're going to start messing around with adding all 4 of these inserts. We'll start off with 1, then 2, 3, and then finally all 4. And then you're also going to hear with and without an internal muffle for the drum. So I myself am a huge fan of the muffle pad that Dave Weckl came up with. It's actually made by Remo. They make this for both 22 and 20-inch bass drums. It actually comes with clips that you're supposed to clip it into, and the clips actually install to the bottom of your bass drum shell. I myself don't like using them because if I am in a situation where I do have that mic port and I go to a gig and the sound guy immediately comes on the talkback mic and goes, "Can you do anything about that bass drum?" I can just grab this, throw it through that front port, and I usually like to rest it along the batter head itself, and that will solve the problem. So that is something to consider, something to get. It's not too much money, and then you can add and remove this. Of course, if you have that port on the front, makes it super easy. Okay, so back at the kit, it is now time for the playing example. Throughout this example, I'm going to start out with the drum wide open with absolutely no muffling. As I continue to play through the groove, I will add one piece of muffling throughout until the drum is fully muffled. So enough of me talking, let's get to playing. And there you have it. Just by changing the batter head and the different type of muffling makes a huge difference with how this bass drum sounds. Like I mentioned before, my personal preference is to have the kick drum as wide open as possible. And in my opinion, as I added more pieces of muffling to this drum, I started to lose the initial attack and the punch that I was getting out of it. As a matter of fact, as I added more muffling to it, it started to sound more and more like a basketball being dribbled on a court. But that just goes to show you why I like the Remo PS3 Clear more, because it has a lot of punch to it. Either way, I would love to hear what you think, so make sure you leave a comment in the comment section below, letting me know what sound you like the most. If you are viewing this video on YouTube, make sure that you do hit that subscribe button and the bell notification. That way you're notified of any additional content that I upload to the channel. Now, if you have any additional questions on tuning a bass drum or muffling it, feel free to reach out to me at nickcostamusic.com or leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll try and help out any way that I can. And that is it. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Hopefully you've gotten some useful insight on how to tune your kick drum or bass drum. Tune into episode 2, which will be going over the same process, but with a non-ported front head. And until next time, see you later.